Well, maybe not the last time I saw you, but not too long ago when I saw you, I told you that I told shameless stories about my children. I don't really have too many of them for you today. They're getting to the point where they're really not so funny anymore. So, although in hindsight, well, I will tell you one. So the baby, she's 10, and their Christmas card this year we did ourselves. My oldest decided that she was going to do the family photo of the kids, and she gets them all dressed up because, you know, she's the mother hen, she's the oldest, you know how that whole birth order thing works out. I said, fine, just let me know when I need to show up with my iPad and click the photos. So she worked out their wardrobes and what they were going to do and all this sort of stuff, and they're wandering around in the backyard, and she had all of these artistic ideas about how it should go and this or that and the other, and they ended up next to this tree. And the youngest starts climbing the tree. And then, as it turns out, she hangs upside down in the tree. So the Christmas card with her, with the youngest, was with the monkey upside down in the tree, her hair hanging, and the other two standing there. So anyway, crazy kids doing crazy stuff, but they're great. With her, the story, though, is, so she's our hanging from the tree monkey, a little bit in my generation, what you would call a tomboy. You know, she was the one who had made up all of these names for herself when she was a little kid, not the least of which was Meatball Jackson. So apparently she was a linebacker for the Detroit Lions at some point in a past life. But anyway, Meatball Jackson, hanging upside down in the tree, earlier this month has somehow decided that now she's in the 5th grade, she's 10, she has a boyfriend. Okay, boyfriend. And so I find next to the computer all these little notes, I heart, and his initials are GE, and all of this sort of stuff that you see from, you know, pre-teenage girls still. All of this, and she decides that she's going to finally start wearing her hair up, because our big thing is she has this crazy wild curly hair, she won't ever put it up, whatever. She starts putting it up over spring break, and I'm like, don't say anything to her because it will ruin it. So a week later, she goes back to school after spring break. She won't wear it up in a bun, but she decides that she wants to start straightening her hair. Okay, this is, I'm telling you, I mean, whenever you move towards cosmetology with this child, I mean, you have moved into a world of just awesomeness. And so again, I tell her sisters, don't say a word. Well, Dad gets home, and she won't show her sister. She's walking around all night with a blanket over her head after she had me straighten her hair. Dad comes home. She wants to show Dad, but she's not quite sure how to do it. And I'm like, Mark, please, just calm. Don't say anything. Tell her she looks beautiful, whatever. Well, she decides to outsmart herself, which is the moral of this story. Be careful about outsmarting yourself. She decides, well, I'm just going to take my picture, and then I'm going to show Dad my picture. Fine. So she picks up her iPad that Santa Claus brought her at Christmas time, takes her own picture. She goes walking into our bedroom. She's walking into the bedroom holding the picture. And then all of a sudden she realizes, she's like, oh my stars, I just blew my own cover. I took my picture, but here I am standing with my straightened hair showing you my picture. And the look on her face was priceless. So the only shameless story is don't try to outsmart yourself, and particularly with this stuff, it's not that complicated. A lot of it is written down. There are people who can help you with the revenue sources and figuring out how you do it, what you can use it for, what is your budget going to look like, what are the policy decisions like Jack talked about that drive the choices for revenue sources that you might want to choose. Couple of disclaimers that I always have. I think I may have told you all these. I have a bias towards home rule. That is sort of what the association is about. But I've also been doing it for 20 years. I mean, I was taught by the master, Bob Neighbors, and was brainwashed coming straight out of law school. So this is something that now has become a real passion of mine over the decades. I have a bias towards keeping local revenue local. And what am I talking about? This ties into, Jack very briefly mentioned, something called unfunded mandates. Well, what happens in the trickle-down effect from the federal government to the state government is, yep, unfortunately, you all are at the bottom of that water stream. And what happens, though, is you've got an extraordinarily stable revenue source, with the exception of our most recent history, but over time, in ad valorem property taxes. That revenue source is looked at, quite frankly, by the state legislature as a bank. Okay? And so my bias is those are your taxpayers. Those are people you see in Walgreens, in Walmart, at Publix, on your street corner, in your parks, at your Little League games. Those tax dollars, in my opinion, should stay back home. All right? So that's what that one is about. I do have a bias that some taxation is necessary. This is just what we have to cough over in order to be able to live in a civilized society. The bottom line is you cannot do your jobs without some money. Now, we can have a cup of coffee or a cocktail and talk about how much it takes to do your job, but the bottom line is I believe you need some. And where does government get it from? It gets it from taxpayers and local citizens. And almost all policy decisions, frankly, and unfortunately, they come down to money. If you want a new program, if you want to cut a program, if you want to consolidate programs, if you just want to shift priorities, none of those decisions get made until the money discussion is had. And that comes home very clearly and very directly for you all because your budgets by state law have to be balanced. Your expenditures have got to equal your revenues. And so where you decide to spend money, what you decide to spend it on, and how much has got to equal what you have coming in. That means you have lots of choices to make at the policy level and at the legislative level about what your county does. All right, we're going to talk about, I think I probably had also shared with you, I carry this around with me everywhere, the Constitution. And, oh, and by the way, I'm certifiable on this. Chris made us do as a director team. We do a management retreat around the holidays every year, and this year he picked the book called Strength Finders. I don't know if any of you have used it in the private sector at all. Well, all 5 of mine basically related to having strengths with archiving and with analyzing words and books. And I'm not kidding. And I was like, well, there you go. I'm now certifiable, and that's why I carry it around. But all of this stuff comes back to the Constitution. I'm going to track some of that for you just so that you can see the actual language and understand what authority you have over taxes, what you don't have, and what you have over what I call home rule revenue sources. We'll talk about the major tax sources that you have at the county level. I'm leaving aside municipal stuff and most school board stuff today. We're going to focus on your county revenue sources. We'll walk through some of the major home rule revenue sources. The rules for those you will not find in the Florida statutes. The rules for those come from case law, and we'll talk about why that's true. You have a tremendous amount of intergovernmental revenue sources that help fund your budget. State revenue sharing with the state of Florida, you have federal grants. There are lots of other revenues that come into your budget and help you make decisions that come from other governmental entities. I do want to mention unfunded mandates and how it fits into all of this. Why? Because it's one of the very few protections that you have at the local level, back to protecting my bias of keeping your local revenue local for local purposes. And then a couple of emerging issues. Pie charts. We'll go by color. These are the, at the close of fiscal year 11-12 numbers. Basically what you have, for this is not all local government, this is county. The pie of all of the county revenues, $12 billion on a statewide basis from taxes, $10 billion from service charges, and I put a note there. Jacksonville Duval is a consolidated government. They own a massive utility system. All of those revenues are in there, and so $3 billion of the $10 billion belong just to one county. All right, and those service charges is the category where utility fees and rates are going to be for purposes of this statewide reporting. So just sort of keep that in mind. It gives you some sort of perspective on how big the $12 billion number in taxes is. You always have another category. It is the green, $7 billion. Intergovernmental revenues that we mentioned is at $5 billion. It's a significant chunk of change. Now these are B's, billions of dollars. Miscellaneous, 1.3. Permits, fees, and special assessments is at around $1 billion. It's a little bit over. Those are the ones that you have the most control over the decision making. And I'll talk about what I mean by that. And then things like judgments, fines, fees, forfeitures, that sort of thing, code enforcement fines, for example, only around 132 million on a statewide basis. I'm going to come back to the expenditure side. I want to break it down for you a little bit. Let's start actually at the bottom of this list. Remember, we had 12 billion in taxes, all right? 9 billion of that is your ad valorem property taxes. Okay, this is the work engine of the county budget on a statewide basis. State shared revenues, 1.3 billion, local option taxes, 1.1 billion, sales surtaxes, 1.1, local option motor fuel taxes, now you're in the millions, 548 million. Special assessments, 493 million. Communication services tax, 300 million. Public services tax, 257 million. Impact fees, 185, and your local business taxes around 40 million. Okay? Ad valorem property taxes, workhorse of your budget. All right, let's go back. Where are you spending it? Again, let's start at the bottom. Public safety. For you all, who does that mean? Sheriff. All right? Highest, statewide basis. 8.5 billion. General governmental, 7. Physical environment, 6. Other and some non-operating, 5.8. Transportation, 4.7. Human services, 3.4. Culture and recreation, 1.6. Economic environment, 1.4. And then your court-related, around $1 billion. Okay? Just to give you some idea whenever we talk about these things, what we're talking about. I do, not because I don't think you know, I want to very quickly run through a couple of words, though, that will get thrown around by your administrator, by your budget directors, by your finance directors, by the clerk, and some of your other constitutional officers to make sure, and we're going to use these terms a lot for the next 50 minutes. So just to make sure that we are all on the same page, and that one may not be in your list. I made some changes yesterday, sorry. Yeah, I still go over this stuff even though I've been doing it for 20 years. So I don't know whether that's, the good news is I really do prepare for you guys. The bad news is I made some changes you don't have yet. All right, ad valorem, meaning according to value. In Florida, whenever you hear the term ad valorem taxes, you're almost always talking about property taxes. You're talking about real property taxes, so we're talking building and dirt, and we're talking tangible personal property, which basically is inventory for businesses. Millage is the rate that gets applied for calculating taxes. The formula in Florida for what your taxes are on your property is the value of your property as set by the property appraiser times the millage rate. Real easy algebraic formula, and then you get your taxes. You control the millage. Property appraiser controls the value. So you have one piece of the formula is yours. General law and special act. I do want to talk about this for a second because we're going to come back to it. It is a pretty big deal under the Constitution in Florida. What I passed out to you and jokingly said was oh so important is the index, or just a page of the index from the index to special acts and a page of the index to the Florida statutes. What you find in the Florida statutes are the general laws passed by the Florida legislature. Those are the laws that apply, generally speaking, across the board, no matter who you are, what you do, or what's going on, okay? Special acts apply to one locality, to a city, to a county, to a special district. So if you take a look at your indices, you will notice the Florida statutes one, just even one page, I think it's a page of the M's, you see subject matters in the index. If you look at the one page that I handed out of the special acts, what do you see? You see names of cities, counties, and special districts. They apply differently. They are both acts of the Florida legislature, but one is giving authority or taking authority away to just one particular location. The general laws are, generally speaking, will apply to everybody. We'll talk about why that distinction is important in the world of revenue sources in a second. Exemption and immunity. When it comes to ad valorem taxes, these two concepts are something to keep in mind. Your hands are tied to the Constitution in terms of what exemptions can be granted to property owners, okay? All exemptions in Florida from ad valorem property taxes must be based in the Constitution. This isn't something that you all can decide is a great idea at the local level or even that the legislature can. This is something that the entire state of Florida has to vote on. Exemption is a gift. It can be taken away, all right? Immunity, you can never tax it, period. What property can you never tax? Churches are exempt. It's a gift. Certain government is immune, but not all. Your property is immune because you are a piece of the sovereign state. County property, immune from taxation. It's not a gift, it just is because you're the arm of the king, all right? State government property, so most of Leon County, Alachua County, Escambia County, we have several counties in the state with so much state government property, or for Escambia federal, it's immune. You can't touch it. It's like it doesn't exist for purposes of generating revenue for your budget. Why is that important? Because even though there are other governmental entities, they demand, I don't mean personally, but the way they use property or the activities on that property requires you at the county level to do something. Okay? When the state of Florida came in and developed the whole south side of town development here in Leon County, most of you I'm sure have been out to those state offices, beautiful complex, okay? Used to be grassland. You put parking lots and great big buildings on it. What happens whenever we have 3 days of rain? Stormwater comes out into the streets, you've got flooding. Who takes care of that? Who created it? The state. You can't tax them. So they're contributing nothing, but now you've got a tremendous burden on your county budget, all right? And exempt properties, not all city property, for example, is exempt. It has to be used for certain services. It has to be used for municipal purposes. City of Tallahassee owns the dirt and leases it to the Capital City Country Club here in town. It is a golf course. It is fully taxable. They pay every red penny of it. The dirt owned by the city of Tallahassee, but it's a golf course, not a public purpose because it's a private club. It's not exempt from taxation even though the property is owned by the city. All right, trim notice, trim bill. Trim notice is the notice that goes out from the property appraiser in the summertime about proposed property taxes coming up. It has on it, the reason it's important to you, even though the property appraiser sends it out, your public hearings on the proposed budget is a personal invitation for your property owners and taxpayers to come and tell you what they think of the choices you have made in the proposed budget. Okay, the locations and the times are on that trim notice. And then the tax bill obviously is sent out by the tax collector. Homestead. This word is obviously used a lot in Florida, particularly in the world of taxation. You only have one. It is your primary residence is what you need to think of it as. It's not your second home. It's not the condo that you might have at the beach. It's not the townhouse that you rented for your daughter or son whenever they were in Gainesville or Tallahassee, okay? Even though it may be a family home, it is not your primary residence. You only get one homestead. And referendum. And in Florida, referendum is a vote of electors, not property owners. And referenda are held all the time in the world of taxation. Okay. What does the Constitution tell us? No tax can be levied except in pursuance of law. And when this word law is used, what they're talking about is general laws. That's why I wanted to make the distinction for you. There are laws on the books that are special acts that relate to taxation that no longer have any force and effect. And I have been a part of some litigation, and yes, on the losing eye side of it, where we tried to get a special act passed back when I was in private practice to expand the uses of a particular tax source, and the Supreme Court said, nice try, but you outsmarted yourself, back to my 10-year-old with the iPad. You can't do that. You need a general law. All right, and we'll talk about why that is. The state of Florida, the state cannot levy state ad valorem taxes on real property or tangible personal property. Those are yours. School boards, counties, cities. Ad valorem taxes on real and tangible personal property are your 100% purview, okay? All other forms of taxation, so anything other than ad valorem property taxes, what are we talking about? We're talking about local option sales taxes, gas taxes, tourist development taxes, et cetera, are other forms, shall be preempted to the state except as provided by general law. Okay, that's why we lost our case. What has to be provided on those forms of taxation? I'm here to tell you everything. Who pays it locally? How much? How do you implement it? Do you have to have a referendum? Do you need a supermajority of your board to pass it? How long can you impose the tax? What can you use it for? Who do you have to share it with? We'll talk about that. Many of these revenue sources that you pull the trigger on, you are statutorily required to share with your municipalities and in some circumstances your school boards. But you're the ones who get to take the political heat for raising the tax, okay? Back to policy following money, right? So that's what that means. And the Constitution goes on. Counties, school districts, and municipalities have the authority to levy ad valorem property taxes, so they even tell you very clearly in black and white. Other special districts, so fire control districts, well, not water management districts, but water control districts at the local level, they can, or hospital districts, healthcare districts, they have the authority under the Constitution to levy property taxes, but it has to be authorized also by the legislature by general law, and then you have to have a local referendum approving it. You don't need a referendum on your ability to levy ad valorem taxes, but special districts do. Couple of other restrictions for ad valorem property taxes. You know about millage caps. Remember, we talked about millage is the rate, and the Constitution sets out what those caps are. You have 10 mills for municipal purposes, 10 mills for county purposes, 10 mills for school purposes. You, at the county level, can levy 20 of those mills. You can levy 10 mills for county purposes. You can levy 10 mills for municipal purposes, which is another part of the Constitution that comes out of the uniformity provision and this concept of MSTUs, municipal service taxing units. That's where that municipal millage can come into play. Both of those two things work together because of the uniformity provision, which says you set one millage rate for the county. You don't get to pick and choose which properties pay 8 mills. Everybody, if you set the millage rate at 8 mills, all property in the county pays 8 mills for counties, okay? You can't say this industrial park on that side of the county and the industrial park in the northwest of the county and the industrial park in the southeast of the county, they're going to pay 5 mills for economic development purposes because we're really trying to do that as a local community, and that's the policy that we want, but everybody else is going to pay 8. Everybody has to pay at 8, okay? We can't pick and choose that way of properties to levy the millage rate. It has to be uniform within the taxing jurisdiction is the actual language of the Constitution. The way MSTUs get us out of that is you can carve out a geographic area in the county, and it can go inside a city and say, in this, maybe you want to do the donut hole, maybe you want to do the entire unincorporated areas and your largest municipality, and you want to levy a special tax for EMS, okay? You can do that. And you can levy 2 mills within that geographic area The rest of the county is not paying that 2 mills. You have to spend it back in that geographic area, and you have to spend it for the purpose that you levied it. So you've got to spend it exclusively on EMS services in your EMS budget, but you can do it. But when you do that and go inside your largest municipality, you're taking municipal purpose millage from the city, and they've got to give you permission by adopting an ordinance. Because while you can control 20 mills, no property is ever going to pay more than 30, meaning the 10 for county, 10 for municipal, and the 10 for school. So you control 20, or you have the ability to control 20, but no property is ever going to pay more than 30, which means you're taking it from the municipalities. Yes, sir?
Is it legal for a group or a municipality to create their own MSTU?
Nope.
Take money from you?
Nope. Nope. They can't do that. They can't do that with their property taxes. Now, they may be able to get away with it with some other revenue sources, but they do not have the ability to create MSTUs. This is a county-only tool, and they don't have anything like it. Yeah.
Do the CRAs fit in that somehow?
CRAs are a different creature. Community redevelopment agencies or community redevelopment authorities, they're not quite as popular right now. There are some old ones that are still around. In the boom of all the development, they were huge because it is a financing tool that took the increment of the increase in property values, pledged it for bonds, and then did all sorts of basically urban refill and downtown redevelopment and all sorts of stuff, but it siphoned off the increment. Most of them were created by municipalities. I love our brothers and sisters at the cities. These were created by municipalities. They were taking your increment, the increase in the property taxes, okay? And that was all authorized by the Florida legislature.
And we have an area in my county, Vinita Springs, wanted to create their own, another CRA in the downtown area.
Right.
A large area, actually.
Right.
About 20,000 residents.
Right.
Base, and but we'll like over 10 years, we'll lose like $10 million. The county will.
Right.
Of income.
Now, there have been in the last couple of years, because development has not, I mean, the property values have been declining and not increasing. We're not seeing a whole lot of new ones. They may be starting to come back, but we were able to get some statutory protections for you all in the Florida statutes that did not exist and do not apply to the old ones. So ones that have been around for 20 years, these new rules are not going to help you a whole lot with those. But you can envision the circumstance that counties were in, and this wasn't a large urban county issue. This was going on in small rurals. Dixie had, do we have anybody from Dixie? Cedar Key was going to, I don't think they ever did it, but Cedar Key was going to create a CRA, this community redevelopment agency or authority, that covered the entire jurisdictional boundaries of the municipality. Well, that's huge for the county. And they're going to take all of the increase in property value, but as that property redevelops, guess who's going to have to take care of it and provide the services? The county, but they don't get the money. So that was sort of the policy going on there. Yes, sir?
The limitation on within a geographical boundary, you can't have multiple millage rates on an MSTU.
You can have multiple millage rates on an well, not on an MSTU, but you can have the county-wide millage, so let's say it's 6 mills. You could have an MSTU at 2 layered on top of it.
Right. If you could define a special direct benefit to the property, go MSBU?
Go MSBU.
You could have a multiple rate?
Yes. And we'll talk about what he's talking about in a minute when we get to special assessments. You got another question?
That's what we have.
Yep.
I was mistaken.
Yep.
I'm from Levy County.
Yep.
And they're always complaining about how high the taxes are.
Yep. Oh, I guess Cedar Key, Dixie, or Levy? Levy. Sorry. Got it wrong. My children remind me of that too every day. So you can write that one down as mistake number 15 already today, and it's not even noon. All right. Public purpose. Ad valorem property taxes, there is a public purpose requirement in the Constitution. You cannot use it for what the courts say is a primary private purpose. Seems intuitive, seems like a no-brainer, but it's really not. If you have somebody coming to town, IBM wants to put an industrial park in your county, it is not a no-brainer for your community in that circumstance to say that you're not going to spend some of your ad valorem tax dollars to help get IBM to come to your area or to make some improvements in a particular geographic location, okay? If you did, you would probably be violating this provision of the Constitution. Let's say you needed a new connector road to go out to where they wanted to put their industrial complex or their office complex for IBM, and you used ad valorem tax dollars to help fund that collector road. Well, if a court tells you, well, that's really a primary private purpose, the only reason you're doing it is for IBM and nobody else is going to use this road, okay, I'm making this up clearly, but nobody else is going to use this road except for IBM employees, primary private purpose, you've violated this part of the Constitution. So it seems like something that should be just a total no-brainer, but it really isn't. It gets very muddled, and you have to be careful, particularly when you're issuing debt in terms of what you're using the money for. So did you have a question?
That wouldn't be considered for bettering the county getting jobs. I mean, that they would consider.
There are some, yes, and there are some exemptions that are constitutionally authorized for economic development incentives. I'm just saying that, you know, if that didn't exist, I'm making all this, I'm making up some of the examples to try to give you the point. So there are exemptions for economic development that you can do under law. All right, dual tax issues. This gets back to your relationship. Remember, money, policy, that connection. This gets back to your relationship again with your municipalities. All right, under the Constitution, what it says is you cannot levy countywide millage and then use a portion of that millage to fund things that do not provide a real and substantial benefit to the municipal residents. So the municipalities under the Constitution, meaning their taxpayers, are not allowed to subsidize the county budget when they're not receiving any benefit from it. We had cases back in the 80s and 90s with things like Sheriff's Road Patrol, where in some of the large urban counties with so many municipalities, the sheriff wasn't doing road patrol inside the municipalities down there, but the county was funding Sheriff's Road Patrol out of county-wide millage. So all of those municipalities where the sheriff's deputies literally stopped their cruiser at the jurisdictional boundary, turned around and went back the other way, the court said they're not receiving any real and substantial benefit from you spending Palm Beach County the money in that way. Okay? The law on it, I will tell you, is relatively beneficial for you. The courts have really stretched things, not beyond the realm of reason, but they have stretched them in our favor to make this not as much of a concern these days as it was really in the 70s and the 80s. They're really providing deference that if you all make a decision that ad valorem tax dollars really is providing a real and substantial benefit to municipal residents, then they're pretty much leaving that one alone. Another example out of Palm Beach is the most recent one we have, and it's about 5 or 6 years old. The county was funding a portion, or actually all of, the countywide dispatch. So 911 dispatch, most of it was coming from countywide ad valorem taxes. Well, again, in Palm Beach, several of the municipalities had their own dispatch service. And so they were balking, saying our taxpayers, our municipal taxpayers, shouldn't be paying you all, the county, for a countywide service that we're not using. Because if you were in Palm Beach, the city of, and you dialed 911, it went to the city of Palm Beach dispatcher, not to the county one. And all the way up at the Supreme Court, what the court finally said was, nice try. But given the fact, they didn't say this is what I think, but given the fact that you have 30 some odd municipalities in Palm Beach County, your residents are unlike, dialing 911, assuming that it is always only going to be inside those municipal boundaries is crazy. Those are my words, not theirs. But the bottom line was they found a real and substantial benefit, even though certain municipalities had their own dispatch service, because as citizens of the county, they were more likely than not to use the countywide dispatch than any individual municipality's one. Okay? So that's the kind of thing that they're talking about. Major tax revenue sources. You've got ad valorem property taxes, local option sales taxes, local motor fuel taxes, tourist development taxes, communication services taxes, the public service tax, and then there are about 25 miscellaneous ones that quite frankly are written, even though if you look at the language, they don't say things like Monroe County only, because that would make it a special act. They are written in such a way that the population classification exists, or that you have to, the geography has to be this way, or that in the world of the law is a possibility that even if you're Gilchrist County, that you might one day meet those requirements. Most of those miscellaneous ones really and truly only apply to certain jurisdictions. Okay. Ad valorem property taxes first, if we can get it to click over, up, repeat. Exemptions, it's a mess. I mean, that's really what the bottom line is. We've done this to ourselves the last couple of years in terms of trying to reform ad valorem property taxes. Where we found ourselves in the boom years was property taxes starting to go up, but go up in a way that was, in many circumstances, particularly for small businesses, egregious, because the property values were going up. But here's the kicker. Folks under Save Our Homes, like you and me, that would have been the people going to the public hearings and complaining about the fact that my taxes are going up, our taxes weren't going up because we were saved by Save Our Homes. Okay, that's the piece that only allows your assessed value to go up either 3% or CPI, whichever is less. Right, so we were capped. We didn't care. My property taxes weren't going up, and I'm getting all these great services because the property values are going up. Well, what happened is it shifted the entire tax burden to the commercial property and the non-homestead property. And where it really killed people was the mom and pop, independent, small businesses. And it was. I mean, I'm here to tell you, it was real. And people literally were going out of business in the state because they couldn't pay their property taxes. Why? Because we did it to ourselves in the Constitution by capping the homestead property. It was shifting everything over. So now we have a whole bunch of homestead exemptions. We used to only have the first 25,000. It can now be doubled. The Save Our Homes, what we call the Save Our Homes differential, which is the difference between your actual value and your Save Our Homes capped value. You can now capture that and take it with you to your next house, which is what we now call portability. We've got constitutional amendments that deal with all of this in the last 5 to 6 years. We now have a cap on the assessed value of non-homestead property, meaning that in any given year, it cannot go up by the property appraiser more than 10% from the year before. And Amendment 4 that was on the ballot this year in 2012 would have lowered that cap down to 5%, which would have been a killer for us. And there's more. There's Save Our Seniors, there's granny flats. So if you build a mother-in-law apartment on your homestead and your mother-in-law is over the age, I think it's 62, then you get certain exemptions for that improvement on your property. There's exemptions now for wind and renewable energy, conservation land, working waterfront. And then back to that exemption is a gift. This one has been around since the beginning of time. Property owned by municipalities when used for public purposes. Property used predominantly for educational, literary, scientific, religious, and charitable purposes. They are also exempt. Let's see, we've talked about that stuff. Agricultural land, as well as working waterfront and conservation land. It is assessed a little differently than the rest of property, meaning it is assessed not on its actual value. Okay, Ben Hill Griffin is very happy about that. It is assessed based on the use of the property, and so as bona fide ag, it has a lower rate, is really the bottom line. For bona fide ag, for working waterfront property, and for conservation land, when those lands meet certain criteria. It's not based on their actual value. Okay, waterfront property, obviously in the state of Florida, extraordinary market value. But they're not going to be, if they're working waterfront, if it's a fishing pier, and certain other kinds of working establishments on the waterfront, they get classified based on their use, and the bottom line is it's less taxes. Okay. Any questions before we move on about property taxes? Okay. I'm going to fly through some of these. The reason being that they are pretty well outlined in your handouts and then also in the primer that you all received whenever you first came in to office from us in great detail in terms of what the requirements are for these particular things. I do want to hit some of the highlights just so you have in your head what they can be used for and some of the differences. Before I do move away from ad valorem property taxes, back to saying that it's the work engine of and the workhorse of your budget, it can be used, as we mentioned, for any public purpose, okay? Which means that the afternoon session, we'll talk a little bit for debt. There are some additional requirements there, but if you want to do a bond issue and build a bridge, you want to do a bond issue and a major road rewidening, you need to retrofit your wastewater treatment plant. You can use ad valorem taxes for that. There's some additional requirements if you're going to pledge it for debt. All right, but you can use it for general governmental purposes. Almost anything that your budget funds can be funded with ad valorem taxes. That is not the case with anything else we're going to talk about this morning. The uses are very prescribed, and that word earmarked. They are earmarked for specific purposes. So back to policy following money or money following policy. When you want to make decisions about what you want to do, and then you have to match it up with where you get the revenue from, you have to be thinking about which revenue source is going to work. Okay? Because these uses are prescribed once you get beyond the ad valorem taxes. Earmarked, all of them. Yes?
So Tax 2 was passed yesterday about the industrial equipment, where is that going to affect us on the
Ad valorem taxes. Yep, it's an exemption on tangible personal property. The governor's proposal on the lowering of the assessed value and providing benefits to manufacturing equipment will hit us on the ad valorem property tax roll, is where that will come. Manufacturing equipment only. All right, get this to move on, maybe.
On the motor fuel tax?
Yep.
Does that also include part of the Elms nickel?
Yes, we'll get to it.
Okay.
It's coming up. All right. Local option sales taxes. You have all of these local options. I'm going to focus on the infrastructure sales surtax, the first one, and the small county surtax, primarily because those are the two that are available to most of you. The infrastructure sales surtax is available to all of you. The small county one available to 30 some odd of you. The rest of them, well, and the fire rescue services one, but nobody's using it. The rest of them in the middle, the charter county transportation, indigent care, county hospital, voter approved indigent care one, those are pretty well narrowly prescribed as to which counties can impose those. And that's all in your major written materials. Yep.
Why is anyone using the fire rescue?
It's brand new, and I'll tell you in a second, you have to give up other revenue sources in order to do it. So most people don't want to make that trade.
So is it that much outweigh?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not, it doesn't need to be there. I mean, we certainly didn't oppose it. This came from Senator Bennett out of Manatee County. Certainly didn't oppose it. Happy to have another revenue source because these days it's very rare, but it's not very practical.
Will you explain it to us?
Yeah, oh yeah, I'm gonna get there. Okay. All right. All of them have restrictions on use of the funding, who is eligible, whether there's a referendum required or not, whether there's a supermajority requirement or not, and there are caps on the combined levies. We don't get to do all of these, all right, at the same time. Infrastructure sales surtax, all counties are eligible. You can impose it at either a half a penny or a full penny. It is used for infrastructure purposes, although over time, quite frankly, the purposes now have been so expanded by general law that there are a lot of uses, and it goes on for about a column and a half now of the Florida statutes in terms of the authorized uses. They're pretty prescriptive and narrow, each of them, but frankly, it's a lot of things. But in your mind, think, I'm going to build stuff. I'm going to build a bridge. I'm going to widen a road. I'm going to build a new courthouse. I need a new administration building. I need a new jail. Okay, I need a new school. Even though you all don't get to build schools, we'll get to that in just a second. There is a referendum required for the local option infrastructure sales surtax. You adopt an ordinance at the Board of County Commission level. It only has to pass by a regular majority vote, though. You have to share this with the municipalities. How do you do that? You either are able to negotiate by an interlocal agreement what their portion of this is going to be. They don't impose it. You have the exclusive authority to impose this tax. Under the Florida statutes, you can share it with the school board, but you don't have to, which is why I said build a school. Okay? But again, remember, politics and policy, you're the ones voting for it, even if it's to build a new school. And frankly, to build a new school sometimes can be good for your politics, but I'll leave that to a different conversation. Yes, sir?
What's the current sales tax here in Leon County?
What's the rate?
Yeah, is it 6.5?
We are one of the highest, and it's either 6.5 or 7. I think we're at 6.5.
Okay.
Yes, sir?
Question on the one, we have a 1 cent local option tax. Right now we have a lot of national builders from other counties doing the majority of the home building in our area, and I asked our budget person how we could spot check to see if these out-of-town vendors are collecting and forwarding to us the 1 cent local option tax on the taxable portion of their services or materials that they're delivering.
Mm-hmm.
And he explained that they can go to the Department of Revenue, they can look at things, but they can't make copies and they can't contact the payer. Let's say if it just used XYZ lumber from Brevard County is delivering into Indian River County.
Right.
I'd like to go look and see, is that company making, how would we know if they're making tax deposits through the state that get come?
That's all public record. I think you can get to that.
Can you?
I think so. I think so. But you actually raised something that I didn't cover that I want to mention is the tax base, meaning what gets taxed with this local option sales surtax is the same base as the state sales tax, but you all only get to impose this on the first $5,000 of a purchase. Okay? So you're limited in terms of what you can actually tax. I forgot to mention that. The small county surtax, again, a half a penny or a full penny. You have to share the revenue with municipalities. You can share it with the school board. Eligibility requirement, population of 50,000 or less as of April 1st of 1992. Okay, so this is still a whole lot of people. If you have an extraordinary vote of the Board of County Commissioners, so let's say you have 5 members, you get a 4-to-1 vote, you can use this tax for operating purposes. So you build a courthouse, but you've got to provide security, pay the utilities, etc. You can use the small county surtax to pay those bills in your budget in a small county if you have a 4-to-1 vote. A referendum is going to be required if you want to pledge it for debt, though. And this one also can be used for any public purpose that you put in the ordinance. So you have to plan ahead for this one. All right, fire rescue services. Lots of questions about this one. You can impose up to a full penny. Those counties that are eligible, the county cannot have 2 unexpired discretionary surtaxes. Some of these have limitations on how long you can impose them. 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. Think about debt. Think about, a 30-year bond issue. That's what these were designed for, particularly the infrastructure sales surtax. You can't have 2. So if you're Gilchrist County, You cannot have the infrastructure sales surtax that we talked about first, the small county surtax, and impose this one. One of those other ones has got to expire. Okay? You can use it for fire rescue services and facilities. A referendum is required. You have to share the proceeds with the municipalities. And then you have to lower, not only can you not have two other local option sales taxes, but then you have to lower other revenue sources that were funding fire rescue before you do it. And that's why I say folks are not doing it. It doesn't get you anywhere.
We're actually looking into that in these cases. We got the Sabre grant.
Yeah,
And, you can start up a hornet nest pretty quick.
I bet you can.
We got it there.
All right. Motor fuel taxes. There are a whole bunch of these. There's one that's actually authorized by the Constitution that then the Florida legislature stepped in. You automatically get that 2-cent levy. There is a distribution formula statutorily for you. There is a county gas tax that you all do not have to levy that again comes from the legislature. It is 1 cent on motor fuel. That gets distributed by formula back down to you. And then these are the 3 categories of local options. And they don't add up to 9. There's a history about them, but there are 6 pennies. There's the Elms 5 pennies that went along with one of the original major growth management packages back in the early 1990s. And then there's the standalone 9th cent. But it's basically, I think, 12 pennies. Yeah, 12 pennies.
On the county one, on the 1 penny option, that has to flow back to the municipality, correct?
The 9th cent? No, the 9th cent does not. The Elms and the original 6 do. We'll get there. Original 6 cents, 1 to 6 pennies is what you can use. When you're thinking gas taxes, think transportation in terms of uses. Almost all of the uses are prescribed somehow to transportation. Transportation expenditures, that word is actually used and it is defined in the statute. Certain counties can use it for other infrastructure capital costs if, and that should be if, not of, see, mark that down, my next mistake, transportation needs are met. And you cannot use these pennies for operation and maintenance costs unless they are transportation related. Ordinary vote of the Board of County Commissioners, or at your discretion, you can call for a referendum. You have to share the proceeds with the municipalities.
You have to share with them even though they may have no road project to spend the money on, what do they get to do?
There's either by interlocal or a formula, and the formula is based on their historic transportation expenditures. So even the distribution to them does get tied to transportation expenditures. So if they don't have any, I'm not saying they're not going to get nothing, but there will be a correlation between those municipalities, their actual expenditures for transportation as defined, and what you have to give them.
And they're not tied to increased capacity, they can
No.
put on an intersection visual improvement by planting trees around an intersection.
I'm not sure about that. Elms, 5 cents. Let me make one comment. You do not have to levy all of those other 6 pennies to get to this, okay? You can do 1 penny of the original 6 cents. You could come over here to Elms and do 1 or 2 pennies. There aren't prerequisites in that way. Uses, transportation expenditures needed to meet the capital improvement element of an adopted comprehensive plan. This one takes an extraordinary vote of the Board of County Commissioners, or again, at your discretion, you can have a countywide referendum. You have to share the proceeds with the municipalities. And finally, the 9th cent. This is just 1 penny per gallon, and this is all only on motor fuel. This is not diesel, this is not special fuel. Uses, transportation expenditures of a transportation system and related facilities, and that word transportation system is defined statutorily. You can include the cost of acquisition, construction, reconstruction, and maintenance of roads and streets. Takes an extraordinary vote or a referendum at your discretion. You do not have to share this one. Yes, sir.
On Elms, what does Elms stand for?
Environmental and land management, and I forgot what the S is. It's why it went along with, as I mentioned, one of the very first major growth management packages. Remember, think about what the use is on the slide tied back to your capital improvement element, okay? That's where that one came from, but that's what Elms is. It's also a nice tree.
So diesel's not included on this?
No,
Off-road diesel or on-road neither diesel?
none of it. Not for the local options.
Second, like we got a lot of companies in Perry where that buy
Oh, yeah.
30,000 gallons at a time.
Right.
When they pay their, like all the people, the job is just bring the fuel in, or from out of state or out of town, who collects that sales tax? Do we get collected, or do they collect it?
Well, you have a couple of collection methods. If they purchase the gas out of state, then there would not be a way to collect. They've purchased the gas out of state. If they're purchasing it in Taylor County, then under what you can do is either have DOR collect and then they remit back to you. They keep an administrative fee, or you can collect yourself locally. I don't know exactly the mechanics of working with how that happens locally.
That's why a lot
Yeah.
of our companies put big tanks in,
Right.
so they don't have to.
Right.
For
Right.
service their own equipment.
Yep. All right, switching gears a little bit. Tourist development taxes. There are, again, quite a number of these that can be imposed other than the original tourist development tax and the additional tourist development tax. Most of those other ones, though, deal with high tourism counties, basically think Orange. And they do have some other ones that they can do in the Orange, Osceola area. What I really want to mention to you all here, one thing for small counties, there are some extra uses of these particular revenues. Couple of things to keep in mind. You need a referendum. You, meaning the Board of County Commissioners, has to create the Tourist Development Council. You appoint that board. They have to exist. They have to create a plan, and a part of that plan has to be a recommendation that you levy this tax before you can do it, okay? So all of that has to take place first. And think tourism promotion, festivals, fishing tournaments, all of the beach renourishment projects even. Beaches are huge in terms of tourism in Florida. You can use this revenue source for that. Public service tax, charter counties only. This one, again, can be used for general governmental purposes. It can also be pledged for debt without a referendum. It is only available to charter counties. Do we have any in here? Okay, we got some. You have the ability to levy this tax. The non-chartered counties do not. It is done simply by ordinance, no referendum. It is levied primarily on electric and natural gas. It goes on the customer's utility bill, and it can be used for general governmental purposes. It is also on water and sewer, but primarily electric and natural gas. You can also pick which utility services it actually applies to. All right.
It's different than a franchise fee?
It is different than a franchise fee. Yes.
Can you stack it?
You can stack it. All right, communication services tax. I do really want to fly through this one. A couple of points I want to make. It also can be used for general governmental purposes. You don't have to have a referendum. An ordinance of your county commission will do. What you need to understand about this one is a hot legislative topic, as well as the tourist development tax with the online travel companies. But with this one was enacted back in 2000, 2001 by the Florida legislature. There are all these various rates that apply. And to what actually ends up paying. It was all intended to be replacement dollars for fees that you had at the local level and for the state taking away some of the sales taxes on these communication services. So there was intended to be a dollar for dollar exchange on a county by county basis for the revenue you were getting from these particular industries prior to 2001. Okay, dollar for dollar, revenue neutral, which is why now, as the legislature goes back in and takes a look at this revenue source, there was a task force that met in the summertime, legislatively created. These bills will die this session, however. This is a declining, horrible revenue source for us right now because it needs to be retooled. It is not technologically kept up with what technology has done. But I wanted to mention this dollar for dollar exchange change. As you begin to hear about this, you will hear more this summer and more next legislative session. That is critical, because the deal that was made was we were not going to lose money. And so when they talk about uniform rates at the state level and that sort of thing, that means you're going to lose money at the local level in terms of when they overhaul this thing. All these miscellaneous taxing sources, home rule authority, I will leave for another day, except please know that the rules are completely different when you're talking about home rule and the authority that you have outside the world of taxation. When you're talking about taxes, as I have mentioned, everything has to be in the Florida statutes. When you step outside that world, when you want to regulate a business, when you want to enact any other local governance or talk about how you're going to provide fire protection or EMS protection or emergency management services, you're in the home rule world, okay, where you all get to make the policy decisions unless the legislature has enacted something that then you're going to butt heads against and conflict against. That same rule applies even in the world of revenue if what you're talking about is not a tax. And not all of these are taxes, okay? That's why I mentioned home rule revenue sources. What are these things? They are, under the case law definition, you have the ability under the Constitution, without the legislature intervening, to figure out who's going to pay for what, that sort of thing, so long as it is not a tax and it is not inconsistent with general or special law. There are two major examples, things like fees, utility charges, permit fees, license fees, admission fees, all sorts of things, impact fees, or non-ad valorem special assessments. They are not taxes, even though they are levied against property. You have the home rule authority to do it under the Constitution. You did not need the legislature to give you that ability, okay? One overriding, overarching theme, though, when you get outside the world of taxes and into home rule revenue sources, you have all of this. I'm just going to leave you with this in just a second because I have 1 minute. Here's the overriding theme. When you're talking, oh, I have 10 minutes?
Yes, because we started late, so you're good.
Oh, okay. I can slow down. All right. There is still this overriding theme that before we get into some of the nitty-gritty here that I want you to keep in mind, and it is this. And again, this is a super oversimplified example that if you take it outside this room, it will never work, but just work with me here. In the world of taxation, what you are dealing with is you're the power of government, reaching into a taxpayer's pocket and pulling out money. Why? Because. Okay? I'm serious. All right? When you get outside the world of taxation, yes, you, under government authority, are reaching into a citizen's pocket. You don't have to be a taxpayer because they may not own property. You're reaching into their pocket and pulling out money. Why? Because there's a reason and a connection and a difference, okay? If I own a house that is 1,800 square feet and let's get back to my stormwater example. Own a house that is 1,800 square feet. Let's say that my assessed value is $100,000. The millage rate is 1. So my taxes are, who can do the math for me? $10,000. $1,000 of taxes, all right? And then that $1,000 gets used by the county for all sorts of things to fund the entire county budget. Now, that $1,000 has absolutely, positively no connection to any county services that I receive, okay? It doesn't matter whether I call 911 500 times, so long as it isn't a false alarm for those of you counties that have those. It doesn't matter if I put a parking lot where my front lawn used to be and you now have to deal with my stormwater, right? And you have to do that. It doesn't matter if I have 20 children and 3 generations living in my 1,800 square foot house and I have no money, and so you're providing me all sorts of indigent health care, okay? That's $1,000. No correlation to the amount of services that I am receiving or the demand that I put on my governmental entity, right? That's a tax. Now, I get into the world of fees, special assessments, and home rule revenue sources. I want to go into a park. Okay, I pay a park entrance fee. I don't get into the park unless I pay the fee. If I don't pay the fee, I don't get in. If I don't want to get in, I don't have to pay the fee. Connection. I'm not paying, I'm not getting a benefit. I pay, I get the benefit. World of special assessments. I live in a community and we want sidewalks. Who pays for the sidewalks in a special assessment world? The people who benefit from the sidewalks. MSBU. It is likely only going to be the 100 homes in my neighborhood. It is not going to be the 500,000 other residential homes in Leon County paying for the sidewalk in front of my house. Okay? Home rule revenue source, connection. I get the benefit of the sidewalk, I pay for it. If I live on the south side of town, I'm not paying for it, I'm not getting the benefit. All right? There is a connection between when you get outside the world of taxation and what it gets used for and what you, as the payer, either the burden you have created or the benefit that you receive. Okay? All right, user fees. The courts have told us that they have to be reasonable in their amount. They can be for proprietary and enterprise activities. And if so, then those fees can be calculated in such a way that we actually earn a reasonable profit or a prudent return. I didn't make those words up. Those are the words of the court, okay? So if you own property and you are using it in a way that is entrepreneurial in nature, airports, for example, is one of those examples that have been given to us actually by the courts. Case out of Jacksonville, the city of Jacksonville, the airport, the Port Authority, it's a governmental entity. The streets inside the airport are used by cab drivers all day long, 365 days of the year to generate their business. And the court said, yep, you, Jacksonville Port Authority, can levy, it is basically a franchise fees on the taxi drivers over there. They are using your property, the JPA streets, to generate their business. Okay, proprietary activity.
That's not the same as enterprise funds?
That is a budgeting. That's a budgeting and an earmarking sort of term. But most of the money going into your enterprise funds are likely going to come from that sort of thing. Okay?
What do you do when an enterprise fund accumulates huge amounts of excess cash?
You talk to your budget director and your finance director. User fees can be used both for capital and operation and maintenance costs, and they are charged specifically in exchange for some sort of governmental service. Think utilities is a prime example under this category, all right? Oh, and then the court has also told us that you have to have the ability to pay them by choice unless there is statutory authority for it. Where did this come from? City of Port Orange back in the early 1990s decided that they were going to, under their home rule, because they were creative, create a transportation utility that included all the streets. And they charged the city residents a fee, a utility fee, in order to use the streets. And the courts basically said, nice try. That's a tax. You know, you can't go anywhere without using the streets. And they had turned their transportation, so their streets, into a transportation utility and charged a transportation utility fee. And no, it didn't work. And so this paid by choice concept actually came out of that case that said, no, you don't have any choice except to use the city streets, which means then you're in the world of taxes and there's no statutory authority for it and you can't do it. All right, impact fees. Charged against new growth and development to help finance capital facilities made necessary by that growth. There's two parts to the test that have to be met here, meaning the burden that gets created by the new development and then the fact that the money has to be spent back there. Think roads that are going to be necessary to serve a new development. You can do things like parks also can be funded. Libraries can be funded through impact fees. Library, again, capital costs only though, no O&M here. Think water and sewer are your primary sort of pieces of infrastructure that are generally development heavy or development related. There's also now some statutory provisions that deal with it. Franchise fees, I've heard it a couple of times here. A franchise fee is a part of a contract. It's a part of a franchise that you as a Board of County Commissioners might have, for example, with Florida Power and Light or Progress Energy. You see them a lot in the electric utility arena. You might also even have them with your local co-op. And the idea there is you, by contract, have given up the ability to enter into the business of providing electric services because you have the power to do it. So you have foregone that right. They also are using your right-of-ways to conduct their business, that is county property over there on the side of the roads where their lines are, and you're going to charge a fee in exchange for that. It's a contract. They're usually 20, 30, 40 years long. It's calculated as a percentage, and it does have to be separately stated on the utility bill. And it can be layered with the public service tax if you're a charter county. Yes, sir?
Should each franchisee, like AT&T, Florida Power, should they all be paying the same rate?
Not necessarily. You need to be reasonable and you need to not be arbitrary. So I would recommend that electric utilities, for example, if they're using your rights of way in the same way, that they would be classified at the same rate. Now, you may have a different utility provider. We have some that have franchises with solid waste providers, solid waste collectors in the state, let's say. They're obviously using county property in a different way. So their rate is not going to be the same as Florida Power and Light. But the one thing that the Public Service Commission has told us is that it has to be directly passed through to the customer. So back to policy and politics following money, okay, it's going to be there. It's going to say Levy County franchise fee. So just know, you got to own this one. It can be used for general governmental purposes whenever it comes in, though. This is one of those examples, too, by the way, back to the term that I said that wasn't mine, in a proprietary capacity where you can earn a reasonable profit or a prudent return. This is one of those examples. A franchise fee is one of those, too. Special assessments, they are charges against property, usually collected on the tax bill, not taxes, though, because the property derives some special benefit from the expenditure of the money. And again, that's the word of the courts. Two requirements: special benefit to property, and then the amount of the assessment. So what I as a property owner actually pay has to be apportioned to me on a fair and reasonable basis. Again, these are words of the court. The courts have told us these are the places that we can't use special assessments because they don't provide any special benefit. Go back. Public hospitals, public health units, emergency medical services. Once you get beyond the first responder level, they've then told us the Supreme Court says you're providing benefit to people, not property. At that point, you can't do it. Recreation facilities and Sheriff's Road Patrol are the ones that we cannot use these for. There are lots of different ways that the cost gets apportioned among properties. These are all in your notes. You want to pick the one that makes sense based on what it is that you're trying to fund. These are the examples of where the court has told us that we have a special benefit: fire protection, fire and first response rescue, street improvements, parking facilities, downtown redevelopment, solid waste collection and disposal, meaning capital costs as well as just ordinary curbside service, or even dumpster programs, sewer improvements, stormwater, again, both capital and O&M costs on stormwater, and I would actually add water to this as well.
Excuse me,
Yep.
back to that list and the other one which showed no special benefit. It's gotta be a special direct benefit to real property.
Correct.
Okay, I look at most of that, I agree with. Solid waste, I would debate. Vacant property. Just throw that.
You might not charge vacant property then.
Yeah,
Okay, if there is not a benefit to vacant, remember, you make the rules on these. So if you think in your community there is not a benefit to vacant property, right, then both for, we find it sometimes actually in fire as well. Some communities, some counties do not charge vacant property. Some do. It depends on the county. and what may be going on in terms of the service that you're also talking about funding. So yes, solid waste collection may be one, or even disposal. And when I say disposal, I mean you can help fund the capital costs of a new landfill or landfill closure. I mean, all of that sort of thing gets rolled into that disposal cost that I'm talking about. So it may not make sense for your community to do that.
On the other list, the no special benefit.
Yep.
I'm curious as to why law enforcement wouldn't be considered
People.
people. I get
People.
that relationship, but
That's what the courts have told us. That's what the courts have said. I mean, we have made all of the same arguments with respect to law enforcement, or at least to a portion of it. Maybe not to all, this isn't something you're going to fund 100% of your fire budget with. But this is a piece of the puzzle. And even in arguing to the court that there is a piece of law enforcement that is a special benefit to property, they're like, nice try. We don't agree with you. All right, the rest of what's here is again in your notes and is really very straightforward. Shared revenues, the one thing I do want to mention is particularly the first 1, 2, 3 on here, the revenue sharing programs that we have with the state of Florida. They are all statutorily prescribed. The amount of money you get is by a statutory formula, and then what you can use the money for, again, is statutorily prescribed. But that is all in your much longer written materials in your book. But it's all there, but it all comes from statute. You don't need me to read that stuff to you. So. I would just leave you with this final thought, back to our theme of money following policy, policy following money, whichever way you want to look at it. The one thing we have not talked about is that usually what is going to happen, none of these revenue sources are going to fund, I just mentioned it, 100% of that particular expenditure line item in your budget. You're going to be blending and stacking these, and you're going to be asking yourself, who is paying? Who is paying? And who at the local level do we think should bear the burden of this particular charge? Tourist development tax, for example, the folks who live in your community, unless they're sleeping at the hotel, are not paying it, okay? They're not paying that. That's on short-term rentals, less than 6 months. That means the tourists are paying it. So you need to think about that as you start to look at the policy decisions that you have and how you think you might be funding it, and where these things then shift because of the decisions that you make. Okay? And I'm going to stay for lunch if you have questions. So.
Thank you.